Bob Steele is a Connecticut radio legend. His 65 years of continuous broadcasting on WTIC AM made him the longest-running radio personality in the country. His morning radio show ran from 1943 to 1991, attracting an audience unequaled in market share or longevity by any other radio personality in any major market. During his unparalleled career, he set the professional standard, both on and off the air, for his colleagues.
He was really one of a kind. I mean, you can't really point to any other broadcaster around the country that was like Bob Steele.
6 days a week for nearly 50 years, Bob Steele brightened the morning for millions of listeners throughout southern New England with his easygoing and comfortably predictable program. His warm baritone was often the first voice of the day that his listeners heard.
When he spoke, when Bob Steele spoke, you wanted to hang on every word he was saying. Bob made you feel good.
Steele's intelligence, wit, and charm were a perfect match for the Connecticut of his time. With a career that spanned generations, he became the most beloved broadcast personality in the state.
He was really the icon of New England broadcasting. No one was ever competition for Bob Steele. No one. No one. No one.
Good morning, everybody. There's our good old hunt of the Black Forest to start another day and another week. Bob Downs is our engineer, and if anything goes wrong, we'll blame him. Good morning. You're just tuning in, are you? Welcome to our little show here. Good morning. Buongiorno, Calimera, and other good mornings. I'm only pretending I don't know any of these languages, but I know how to say good morning in a couple of them.
Robert Jesse Steele was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1911, the only child of Susan and Hampton Lee Steele. His father, a stockyard equipment salesman, and his mother divorced when Bob was 5. At 6, Bob persuaded his mother to change his middle name to Lee, the same as his dad. Susan Steele found it difficult to make ends meet, so at age 7, Bob went to work part-time to help out, running errands for a local drugstore. At 13, he became a motorcycle messenger. Bob's love of motorcycles led to his entering racing and stunt contests in the Kansas City area. He soon started sending in local news to a national motorcycling magazine. That led to the editors offering him a monthly column, Crazy Cracks from KC. 14-year-old Bob Steele, at $7.50 per column, had secured his first media sports reporting job.
I love baseball and boxing. I got interested in baseball when radio first came out, you know, in the early 20s, and especially listening to the World Series back in the 20s, the old-time sportscasters. Got me interested in boxing, and in 1927 I started boxing myself as an amateur and as a lightweight, 135 pounds, when I was 16 years old, and I had 52 amateur fights, and I was lucky enough to win 30 of them, and I won my first professional fight, but I lost the next 12, and altogether I lost 14. I always like to think I was robbed 14 times, and then my mother said, you know, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you gave this up.
After dropping out of high school several times in order to work, Bob finally graduated in 1929 at the start of the Great Depression. After graduation, he started a sandwich shop with his mother. The restaurant closed after about 12 months, leaving Bob without work. In search of a job, Bob moved to Los Angeles in 1930, telling his mother he'd send for her when he got work. In LA, he worked as a motorcycle messenger for a bank, sold motorcycles at a dealership, and performed motorcycle stunts in movies. His mother later joined him in Los Angeles, where they lived for 6 years. Bob entered racing competitions there and began writing Poppings of the Day for another national motorcycle magazine. Later known as Stalling Around with Steele, the column was full of puns, corny humor, and wry observations, all of which would be a lifelong mainstay of Bob's career. Bob also endured many racing and stunt accidents, landing in the hospital 14 times by the time he was 21. At a Santa Maria race meet in 1931, Bob hurt himself falling off his motorcycle and couldn't compete that day. It was a lucky break, The regular stadium announcer had fallen ill, and Bob was asked to fill in.
And since I knew all the writers and I knew about the game, I did the public address work. First time I'd ever been in front of a microphone. And it was quite a thrill for me, actually. I got a big kick out of it.
As the Depression deepened, Bob got a job working as a checker in a California bean field for the Federal Works Progress Administration. He made $94 a month. In May 1936, Bob received a telegrammed invitation.
A friend of mine who had been a racer, motorcycle racer in California, quit the game and decided to promote racing, and he wanted me to do the public address work here in Hartford.
The PA job paid $30 a week.
I arrived here at 2 o'clock in the morning, the 10th of May, 1936. I had 20 cents in my pocket, 2 thin dimes, and as I've said many times, I'm worth 10 times that today, so I don't have to worry.
At the end of the summer racing season, Bob prepared to return to California.
I had a day to kill, and I went downtown in Hartford, and I went to the movies. The girl at the cashier's cage said, if you come back in about 20 minutes, this thing will start over again. If you go in now, you'll spoil it for yourself.
Bob crossed the street to the Travelers Insurance Company, which owned WTIC Radio, the top station in Connecticut. He talked his way into meeting the station's chief announcer and asked if any positions were available. To Bob's delight, he was told that, as a matter of fact, they had auditioned 13 candidates earlier that day. He got his audition.
I read some of the news, and they gave me commercials to read and asked me to describe a parade or a boxing match or anything, you know, just to see what I could do. And they gave me the job. The boss said, oh, you can go to work tomorrow. That was the best pay in Hartford at that time for a beginner in radio, that is, in announcing. $35 a week.
He was an excellent announcer. He could read a 70-second commercial in 60 seconds and not make it sound rushed. But he could do it.
In 1938, Bob began hosting a new program called Strictly Sports. 5 years later, he took over WTIC's popular morning show, the G. Fox Morning Watch, from its previous host, Ben Hawthorne. In 1950, the show was renamed The Bob Steele Show and was on its way to making radio history.
There were a couple of things that made him especially successful. Number one, he was appearing in a 50,000-watt powerhouse so that you could hear him anywhere. Secondly, even if he had been in a much less powerful station, his personality shone through so that he had the combination of great power and great personality.
One day in 1937, while riding the elevator to the 6th floor radio studios, Bob met Shirley Hansen, who worked on the 11th floor Travelers Actuarial Department. They became engaged that fall, and in January 1938, they began a marriage that lasted more than 64 years. In 1941, the Steeles moved from Hartford to Wethersfield. A year later, Shirley gave birth to the first of their 4 sons.
Yeah, we all listened. We really had no choice because the radio was on all morning. And indeed, the radio in our house was usually on all day. We didn't see him that much. That was true during the week, but after all, we were at school. But the weekends were a different story. He worked to be a good father and be a good husband.
It certainly stands out in my mind that the dedication that he had to our mother. He would never hesitate to say how beautiful she was, how wonderful she was, how much he loved her.
When Bob took over the morning show, it aired from 7 to 8 a.m. The program gradually expanded to 4.5 hours, becoming a showcase for his talents and a daily habit for generations of listeners.
And the time now is 22 minutes past 6 in the morning. And if you're leaving for work right now, don't forget your keys and your lunch and the badge. And we're about to find out how the traffic is doing out there.
When you were listening to him on the radio, you felt that he was just talking to you. And there are not many in our business today that do that. And he always told me, he said, that microphone is a person.
A very happy 80th, and welcome to the club, Joseph Shaughnessy, better known as Shock, formerly of Bantam, now Watertown.
I mean, who could ever forget the no schools? I mean, when it snowed, kids used to listen to Bob Steele because he'd cancel school. They thought that he was the one that canceled school. I know I did.
He sounded like your grandfather. I mean, just, you know, a relative. Just a warm, comfortable voice that you could spend mornings with. I think that was his secret.
I think Bob became a steady habit in the land of steady habits. The other part of that was WTIC Radio had established itself as the go-to place. I think this town went to 1080 radio if there was a major news event, if there was a weather situation, whatever it happened to be. And I think Bob was a big part of that.
All right. Do you have any music left out there, Bob? Just a few bars of anything. Something I could hum with. I will hum this in Spanish.
Bob was well known for his corny jokes and his excellent sense of comedic timing. His gentle humor was often self-directed, not only in his on-air performances, but also in his prolific cartooning.
Oh, yes. A little tip I use around Thanksgiving time. A lot of people think it's great. It's helped many. In dressing a turkey, first make sure his little stockings are on straight.
I was only here 3 weeks, and somebody said to me, you got the corn bowl on in the morning, the corny jokes and the terrible music, and I said, sir, I'm not from this area. If he's so bad, why do you listen to him? He goes, I don't know, but I've been doing it for 10 years.
Which month has 28 days? Anyone know? I heard you out there, you said February, didn't you? No, all 12 months have 28 days. Yeah.
Well, we sort of clashed on the sense of humor, because when I arrived in 1981, I think within the first week or 2 weeks, I started a feature called The Dirty Joke of the Week. And he was horrified. Oh, my goodness, he was beside himself that anybody on the air would be telling dirty jokes, and he didn't talk to me for the longest time. But then I think he saw that I wasn't going anywhere. So we became friends.
I mustn't forget to mention my favorite aunt and uncle, Uncle Stainless and Aunt Beth. For Bethlehem, they're a fastidious couple. She's fast and he's hideous. Another uncle, 62 years old, that's Rusty. He's 62. He's looking forward to age 65 so he can go on Medibooze.
He did use us as a testing ground more than once. I always thought he had a wonderful wry sense of humor, and he always had a twinkle in his eye. He was wonderful with puns. He was wonderful with just observations.
1 minute before 9 is the correct time. And remember, kids, never play with Daddy's pipe. After all, he doesn't smoke your toys, does he?
Bob's expertise in sports and his winning personality earned him friendship and rapport with a wide range of athletes. His reputation for predicting winners, however, was an entirely different matter.
I swear that he would sometimes pick the wrong team deliberately because he liked the reputation and the people talking about him. You know, it got to the point where people were interested in a heavyweight fight mainly because Bob Steele had predicted who was going to win, and they wanted to be sure that he was wrong, upholding his reputation.
Then the Astros and the Angels will meet, and the Angels will win the World Series. Now, that is official. So, jot it down and act accordingly.
Throughout his long career, Bob met many of the greatest athletes of the 20th century.
Great athlete, I mean the world's greatest, has to have something besides the gift. He's got to know what to do with it. And especially a fighter, he has to have self-discipline. He has to make himself do things.
One of Bob's most popular features was The Word for the Day, his guide to proper pronunciation, grammar, and meaning.
And he had a big dictionary in the back of the studio. Oh, Lord, it must have been 8, 10 inches thick. That was the gospel as far as his word of the day was concerned.
Now, our word for the day is reprise, R-E-P-R-I-S-E, reprise. One might think it was reprise. Reprisal, R-E-P-R-I-S-A-L. Different word, though. Reprise in music, a repetition of a phrase, a return to an original theme. Reprise.
Bob took a great pride in protecting the English language, and because of that, all of us who worked with him on staff, he was our chief announcer. We took that very seriously, too.
He would say to me, now, I know you want to do your best, and I know you want to sound good. I know you want to do the right thing. So this is the way you pronounce the word. It's Salisbury, not Salisbury. And he did it very gently and also was very encouraging.
I'm sure I bristled more than once, but as I got older, I appreciated more and more and more what he had taught me about language, appreciation for language.
I became an English teacher. Philip was an English teacher for a while. Robert spoke in the Congress, and we were obviously very much influenced by Dad. The last time that he corrected me was last Thanksgiving at dinner at my house. I said the prayer and finished it with amen, and he said, amen.
And you said,
amen.
When you were listening to him on the air, it would seem like he didn't have a clue where anything was. And yet, sitting there in the studio with him, you realized that he had the piece of paper that he was shuffling everything. It was right in his hand. But it was a great show. It was a great illusion.
Now, let's have a look at our tiddlywinks from the teletypes, see what we have in the way of little items of little importance. And I don't know what happened to him. Here we are. Here we go.
He was always tremendously prepared. He was very professional and expected and demanded that of everybody he worked with, particularly himself. He was very tough on himself. Yes, he demanded perfection when you were working with him on the air, but he did it in a very calm, in most cases. There were occasions when it wasn't quite so calm, but for the most part, it was a very calm and welcoming demeanor.
You could expect a tough time from him if you were not performing to the way that he thought you should be, or if you were 30 seconds late for a meeting. I mean, he lived by the clock.
Right. He was really my mentor. He was the one that said, you always got there, a long time before your show. You rehearsed your news. He said, if you're going to do commercials, you go out and you meet your sponsors. You dress properly. You look like you were going to a job. It elevated you. It made you better.
And if you were not prepared totally, if you, God forbid, mispronounced a word or a name or something, he would zoom through the ceiling and nothing flat. He'd play a record and play it twice because he needed time to talk to you. So he was a taskmaster.
It was something for us to live up to. I used to call it the United States Military Academy of Broadcasting because nothing went by. If copy was wrong or it was missing, I mean, he would scream epithets all over the place. But it was beautiful because he'd sit right down and put on the switch, and sweetness would come out of his mouth, it was just great.
There were a few mornings where you stood aside going to get your coffee because Bob was on the warpath on his way from the studio to the copywriter's office.
He was doing a live commercial and the information wasn't on the page. He would be walking up and down the hallway yelling for someone to help him, Anybody know what the hell's going on around here? Anybody know what's going on around here in this 2-watt radio station?
For nearly 50 years, Steele's share of the daily morning radio audience in Connecticut ranged from 35% to more than half, a feat that put him in the top ranks of radio personalities in the country.
Well, the radio scene was Bob Steele in the morning, and Bob Steele in the morning, and Bob Steele in the morning. And that was it. He had everybody. No one could beat Bob Steele from our station or any station. No one.
Bob Steele had monster ratings, something like a 35 share, which was unheard of. 35 share in morning radio. He was a killer in the market. I mean, everyone listened to him.
Bob's decades-long dominance in the ratings led to an unparalleled demand from businesses to advertise on his program.
He cared about the advertiser, he cared about the products, he cared obviously about what he was going to say about them, and was keen to be aware of how well the advertisers were doing.
Bob was extremely important to me and to the station because he brought in the revenue. In fact, at one time he accounted for 76% of all the revenue on this radio station.
That's Eukanuba, a top-quality, nutritious dog food, and what makes it different from ordinary dog food is
one time we were sold out by the year, which meant, let's say you wanted to advertise with us, we'd put you on the waiting list. Well, this was very difficult if you were running a sale next week to Bob was that popular, people would buy 3 spots a week, 52 weeks a year. Year in and year out.
The best you can do for your dog, right, Corky?
But he was the best air salesman that I've ever seen.
Despite being on the air during some of the most turbulent times in this country's modern history, Bob never used his popularity to promote a political position.
You never knew where he stood, and that was on the air or in private.
It was not Bob Steele's job to politic on the radio. It was Bob Steele's job to get people up, to tell them what was going on, and maybe educate them a little bit in a nice way that was just, tailored to people being half asleep at the time.
In 1957, at the height of his popularity, Bob hosted the premiere broadcast of Channel 3, WTIC-TV.
I'll never forget the first time I was on television. It was it was a near disaster for me.
We needed a lot of things to build this station with, and I want to show you all about it on a film that we have ready for you now. The film is about ready to roll, I trust. I hope that I don't have to get off any more jokes.
I was in a studio with maybe 100 people.
That's wonderful. A lot of things have... this is one of the greatest moments of my life, friends. I am out of place with the teleprompter and all. I'm very sorry, but we had to get away on some kind of foot and had to be the wrong one here. But nonetheless, you're watching the tower as it goes up. They're having more trouble than I'm having right now, as a matter of fact. But they came through. That's the main thing.
Well, it was just downright embarrassing. But for some reason, it turned out all right. I mean, people began to laugh.
Those things are called trenches. The things that I wish I was in right now. And now, if I'm not in a spot, I don't know what I am in. I'll tell you that right now.
It's Close Up on Sports, and here is Bob Steele.
Thanks, Joe, and howdy, sports fans and everybody. How are you tonight? Over at the Central Gym.
Starting in 1957, Bob's workload increased to 13 hours a day, 6 days a week, when he began hosting the nightly Close Up on Sports and became sports director for both WTIC Radio and television. He continued this grueling schedule for 10 years, finally dropping his TV duties in 1967.
I've always had the feeling of, for the 30 years that I've been doing sports on radio and TV here, that we were all a sort of family of sports fans together, and a friendly family, in spite of the few unfortunate predictions I've given you.
Bob again hosted an inaugural TV station broadcast in 1981, when Channel 61, using the acquired call letters WTIC-TV, signed on the air.
Tonight, we're making history together. You're watching the live inaugural telecast of America's most powerful television station, WTIC Channel 61, Hartford, Connecticut, USA.
Bob is the most popular Connecticut media personality ever. Clearly aware of his celebrity, he kept many scrapbooks full of clippings and photos related to his career. But also apparent was his humility, as evidenced by often altered photos and numerous self-mocking comments.
He was a real deal. He was genuine, he was authentic, he was not contrived. Many guys in broadcasting were a little affected, and Bob Steele was, whether you sat down with him or whether you listened to him, the theater of the mind was you're sitting down at breakfast and you're listening to your best friend. He was Bob Steele. Off the mic, on the mic, he was Bob Steele.
I think Bob was surprised to be as well-loved as he was. I don't know that he ever recognized his own value to the community or to the station. I would love to have been his agent. He was always surprised that people were standing in line to meet him and greet him. Probably was surprised by the size of his paycheck, which I think could have been a lot more.
I know personally that he had several opportunities to go to other cities and to other stations, and he felt a bond with Connecticut. He felt a bond with the station. I know that he never went to bed in his life as an adult without thanking God for what he had.
Bob received hundreds of letters from his listeners each week and spent many hours responding.
During his program, in the breaks, I could see him over there writing his little postcards out in response, handwriting. He was a great, great man. He was a good friend to all of his listeners for years and years and generations after generations. He just built that confidence, that faith in the listening audience, and he just sustained it over all those years. He didn't change his shtick, if you will, in any way. He didn't have to, and he shouldn't have. He's Bob Steele.
The recipient of many honors throughout his long career, Bob was an early inductee into the National Radio Hall of Fame. In 1986, Hartford celebrated his 50 years on the air.
I only wish that my parents could still be around to hear the nice things that you've said. I know my father would have been very proud to hear these wonderful comments and all the nice things that you've said. And I know my mother would have believed them.
A lot of the things that he was still doing in the 70s and 80s had been done away with in other markets, thought to be too hokey or too old-fashioned or what have you. But it still worked with him because people loved him so much.
I can see you dancing around the kitchen. Oops, you just dropped an egg. It spoils it all.
A number of people described him as sort of like an old slipper.
Right on your new shoe.
You know, you just never want to give him up.
I once stopped him in the hallway, and I said, Bob, you've been on the air 50 years, morning show giant, biggest ratings in town. How do you attribute your success? What's the secret? Thinking that he would impart some great wisdom, and he said, all right, kid, when you're selling hot dogs on the same corner long enough, everybody comes to you for a hot dog.
Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful morning, and just like any other beautiful morning, I wish people wouldn't make so much of a fuss.
After 48 years hosting his morning show, Bob signed off his last daily broadcast in 1991.
Dos Vidania and all those other words. Sudia, yeah, Slanta, and hasta la vista, pip pip, and cheerio.
In 1991, Bob began a Saturday program once a month, which he continued until shortly before his death on December 6, 2002, at the age of 91.
Old Bent would be furious if he knew I was whistling with that, spoiling his record. Bent Fabric and Alley Cat. Yeah, and the boss probably, too. He told me not to whistle anymore, but I just took a gamble. I figured maybe he's out of town. This is WTIC AM 1080 in Hartford. And now, friends, we have a time check. And would you just fill in your own time, please?